A simple banking notification can sometimes reveal life's most painful truths. Georgia Hammond's world shattered on a Friday evening when her phone chimed with an alert she wasn't meant to see. The quiet literature professor had just settled into her favorite reading chair, auburn hair pulled back loosely, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, when the innocuous ping from her banking app interrupted her concentration. She almost ignored it. Almost. Georgia tapped the notification, expecting to see Sebastian's usual gas purchase or perhaps the monthly subscription to his golf magazine. Instead, her emerald eyes fixed on a charge at Le Petit Jardin for $273. The restaurant name wasn't familiar. Her heart missed a beat, not yet understanding why this particular charge felt so wrong. But something in her gut twisted uncomfortably. Setting down her book, Georgia stared at the screen for a long moment before opening her browser. A quick search revealed Le Petit Jardin was a high-end French restaurant with intimate private dining rooms and romantic lighting, located in the neighboring town about 45 minutes away. The kind of place people went to celebrate special occasions. The kind of place her husband of 13 years had never once taken her. "That's strange," she murmured to herself, her elegant fingers tightening around her phone. Sebastian had texted her earlier that day, "Working late tonight. Big presentation for the Westfield account tomorrow. Don't wait up." Georgia placed her phone on the side table and removed her glasses, pressing her fingertips against her closed eyelids. She tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was a business dinner with clients, though Sebastian usually used the corporate card for those. Maybe he was planning a surprise for their upcoming anniversary. But they never celebrated their anniversary until the following month. The living room suddenly felt too quiet, the walls of their tasteful suburban home pressing in around her. 13 years of marriage, and something as small as a dinner charge now felt like a betrayal. She'd always trusted Sebastian completely. The thought that he might be lying to her had never seriously entered her mind until this moment. Yet, here she was, heart racing, questioning everything. Georgia glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Sebastian still wasn't home, despite his working late message sent at 6 o'clock. He picked up her phone again, finger hovering over his contact, then set it down without calling. What would she even say? Accuse him based on a restaurant charge? She needed more than suspicion. She needed certainty. At 12:45, Georgia heard the sound of Sebastian's luxury sedan pulling into the garage. She had moved to the kitchen, pretending to make herbal tea while her mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. When he entered through the side door, she immediately noticed his slightly loosened tie and the faint smell of expensive cologne, stronger than what he'd applied that morning. "You're still up," Sebastian said, surprise evident in his voice. His tall frame filled the doorway, his dark hair showing distinguished touches of silver at the temples. At 41, Sebastian Hammond remained as handsome as the day they'd met, his success as a marketing executive having afforded him the confidence that came with professional achievement. Georgia carefully kept her voice neutral. "Couldn't sleep. Thought some chamomile might help." She stirred her tea with measured precision. "You're home late. How was the presentation prep?" Sebastian set his briefcase down and loosened his tie further. "Exhausting." The team ordered Chinese and powered through. He approached, planting a quick kiss on her forehead. "The Westfield people are demanding." Every slide had to be perfect. Georgia noticed he avoided her eyes, focusing instead on removing his suit jacket. "Must have been stressful," she offered, watching his movements carefully. "Did you eat enough? I could make you something." "No need. I'm fine." Sebastian waved dismissively. "Just need a quick shower and then sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As he headed upstairs, Georgia remained in the kitchen, her tea forgotten. Chinese food. Another lie, small but significant, stacking atop the first. Her husband of 13 years, the man who had promised to cherish and honor her, couldn't even tell her the truth about dinner. 20 minutes later, Sebastian emerged from the bathroom in pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair damp from the shower. Georgia had slipped into bed, pretending to read, though the words on the page meant nothing to her racing mind. "You should sleep," Sebastian said, climbing into his side of the bed. "It's late." "Just finishing this chapter," she replied softly. Within minutes, Sebastian's breathing deepened into sleep, aided by what Georgia suspected was alcohol. The faint scent of whiskey had lingered beneath the mint of his toothpaste. She waited another 30 minutes, ensuring he was deeply asleep, before carefully setting her book aside. Throughout their marriage, Sebastian had always been an exceptionally sound sleeper, particularly after drinking. Georgia counted on this now as she quietly slipped from the bed and approached his side. His phone lay on the nightstand, face down. Sebastian had always been open with his devices before. They even knew each other's passwords as a matter of practicality. But lately, she'd noticed he kept his phone closer, and the few times she'd needed to use it, the password had been changed. Georgia's heart hammered in her chest as she carefully lifted the phone. The screen illuminated, asking for a passcode, confirmation of another change in their relationship. Holding her breath, she looked at Sebastian's sleeping form, then gently took his right hand. With practiced care from years of helping him unlock his phone when his hands were full, she pressed his thumb against the fingerprint scanner. The phone unlocked. A wave of notifications filled the screen. Several missed calls and messages from someone saved simply as SC. The most recent read, "Did you get home safe? I'm worried about you." Georgia's throat tightened as she stared at the initials. SC Samantha Campbell? She'd heard Sebastian mention the name recently. A new model they were considering for the Westfield campaign. Her stomach lurched as another piece clicked into place. Working quickly and silently, Georgia found the settings menu. She knew Sebastian wasn't technologically savvy. He relied on her for most tech support. Using his connected tablet in the drawer of her nightstand, she enabled message syncing across his devices. Within minutes, a complete backup of his phone was accessible from her tablet. Georgia returned Sebastian's phone exactly as she'd found it and retreated to the guest bathroom, tablet in hand. With trembling fingers, she opened the messages from SC. The evidence was undeniable. Intimate exchanges, plans for dinner, comments about how they needed to be discreet, photos that made Georgia's cheeks burn with humiliation and rage. Sebastian and a stunning young blonde woman with pouty lips and perfect skin. Samantha Campbell, whose modeling portfolio Sebastian had shown her just 2 weeks ago, casually mentioning they were considering her for the new campaign. Georgia set the tablet down on the bathroom counter, gripping the edge of the sink as a wave of nausea washed over her. 13 years of marriage. 13 years of supporting his career, hosting dinner parties for his clients, rearranging her teaching schedule to accompany him to corporate events. 13 years of building a life that now felt like it was built on quicksand. She splashed cold water on her face and looked at her reflection in the mirror. At 39, Georgia Hammond was still beautiful, her auburn hair falling in soft waves around her face, green eyes bright with intelligence, the few fine lines around them speaking to a life of expression rather than age. She was respected in her field, loved by her students, and had always believed she was loved by her husband. Georgia returned to the bedroom and slipped back into bed, turning away from Sebastian's sleeping form. She didn't sleep. How could she? Instead, she stared at the wall, mind working methodically through what she had discovered and what she would do about it. Morning came too quickly. Georgia rose early, having given up on sleep around 5. She was in the kitchen preparing coffee when Sebastian stumbled in, looking disoriented and anxious. She watched as he patted his pockets, then darted back upstairs, returning moments later with his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "Everything okay?" Georgia asked, sliding a mug of coffee across the kitchen island toward him. "Fine," Sebastian answered too quickly, checking his phone with obvious relief. "Just thought I'd misplaced my phone. Big day today." "The Westfield presentation." Georgia nodded, maintaining her composure with effort. "What time will you be home?" Sebastian took a sip of coffee, not meeting her eyes. Hard to say. Might have to take the clients out afterward if it goes well. Don't wait up. Of course, Georgia replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Good luck today. As Sebastian prepared to leave, Georgia noticed how he checked his phone again, thumbs typing rapidly before slipping it into his pocket. He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt like another betrayal, and headed for the door. Sebastian, she called after him, causing him to turn with a questioning look. I hope everything works out exactly as it should today. He smiled, clearly misinterpreting her words as simple encouragement. Thanks, hun. See you tonight. Or tomorrow, depending. The door closed behind him, and Georgia stood alone in their kitchen, the mug warm between her palms. Over the next 2 days, she would discover much more through the tablet connection. The affair had been going on for nearly 4 months. Sebastian and Samantha had met at a photo shoot for another campaign, and what began as flirtation had quickly escalated. Most devastating of all was the discovery of their upcoming plans. Sebastian had told Georgia he needed to attend a 3-day marketing retreat the following weekend. The tablet revealed the truth. He had booked their mountain cabin for a romantic getaway with Samantha. Their cabin, the cozy retreat they had purchased together 5 years ago as an escape from city life, where they had spent countless weekends hiking and reading by the fireplace. Georgia set the tablet down and picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over Evelyn's contact for just a moment before pressing call. If anyone would understand what she was going through and help her decide what to do about it, it would be her oldest friend. Evelyn? It's me, Georgia said when her friend answered. I need to see you. It's important. Her voice cracked slightly. It's about Sebastian. I'll be right over, Evelyn replied without hesitation. Give me 20 minutes. Georgia ended the call and walked to the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn and flowering gardens she had so lovingly tended. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, yet everything had changed. She had changed. The trusting, supportive wife was gone, replaced by a woman who now understood that 13 years of devotion could be casually discarded for the thrill of someone new. By the time Evelyn's car pulled into the driveway, Georgia had moved beyond shock and sadness. Now, a cold, clear anger was taking their place, and with it, the first glimmers of a plan that would ensure Sebastian's romantic weekend became memorable in ways he could never have anticipated. Evelyn Wallace arrived 20 minutes later as promised, her laboratory ID badge still clipped to her blouse, clearly having left work immediately after Georgia's call. The two women had been friends since college, their bond strengthened through years of shared experiences, celebrations, and hardships. If Georgia was known for her measured composure, Evelyn was her opposite, brilliant but impulsive. With an analytical mind that approached personal problems with the same intensity she brought to her chemical research. I came as soon as I could, Evelyn said, embracing Georgia tightly in the entryway. She pulled back, studying her friend's face with concern. What happened? Is Sebastian okay? Georgia led her into the living room, where she had prepared tea and set her tablet on the coffee table. Sebastian is fine. Our marriage isn't. She gestured for Evelyn to sit. He's having an affair. Evelyn's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, then quickly to anger. What? That can't be right. Sebastian adores you. I thought so too. Georgia's voice remained calm, though the pain behind her words was evident. She reached for the tablet, but evidence suggests otherwise. For the next several minutes, Georgia methodically presented what she had discovered. The banking notification, the changed password, the synchronized messages, and finally, the plans for the upcoming weekend at the mountain cabin. That absolute bastard, Evelyn whispered, setting down her untouched tea. With a model? How cliché can he get? Despite everything, Georgia felt a small smile tug at her lips. Leave it to Evelyn to find the absurdity in the situation. Samantha Campbell, 27 years old. Apparently, she's the next big thing in the modeling world, according to Sebastian. And 17 years younger than him, Evelyn added, her voice dripping with contempt. What are you going to do? Confront him? Georgia leaned back in her chair, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. I've been thinking about that. A direct confrontation seems insufficient. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? If I confront him now, he'll deny it, or apologize, or make promises he doesn't intend to keep. Nothing will change, except he'll be more careful. Georgia set her cup down with deliberate precision. No, I want him to understand the consequences of his actions in a way he can't ignore or explain away. A slow smile spread across Evelyn's face, the same expression she wore when solving a particularly challenging chemical equation. Georgia Hammond, I do believe you're plotting revenge. Not revenge, Georgia corrected. Justice, with a touch of poetic symmetry. Evelyn leaned forward, intrigued. I'm listening. Sebastian has arranged this perfect romantic weekend at our cabin with his perfect young model. Georgia's green eyes glinted with determination. I think we should help make it truly unforgettable. How so? Georgia outlined her initial thoughts, ideas that had formed during her sleepless night. They could let the air out of his tires, cut the power to the cabin, perhaps even arrange some uncomfortable encounters with the neighbors. Evelyn listened attentively, then shook her head. Those are good, but they're inconveniences, not consequences. We need something more impactful. She paused, her scientist's mind clearly working through possibilities. Something that affects them personally. What did you have in mind? Evelyn hesitated. You know what I do for a living, right? Of course. You're a research chemist at Northwood Laboratories. And do you know what I've been working on for the past 18 months? Georgia thought for a moment. Something about non-toxic dyes for medical imaging, right? Evelyn nodded, a mischievous spark in her eyes. Specifically, dermal reactive compounds that change color when exposed to specific conditions. She leaned forward, including a particularly interesting fluorescent green dye that remains colorless until activated by heat and moisture. Georgia's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Like shower water? Exactly like shower water, Evelyn confirmed. And once activated, it bonds temporarily to keratin. That's what hair and the outer layer of skin are made of, creating a harmless but extremely vivid coloration that lasts for days. It's perfectly safe, just extremely noticeable. For the first time since discovering Sebastian's betrayal, Georgia felt a genuine laugh bubble up from her chest. You want to turn them green? A lovely, unmistakable shade of fluorescent green, Evelyn clarified with a grin. Completely harmless, but impossible to ignore or explain away, especially for a model with photo shoots scheduled. Georgia sat back, considering the proposal. It was outrageous, unconventional, and yet perfectly fitting. How would we even do that? The cabin has a water tank, right? Not city water? Georgia nodded. Yes, it's on a well system with a holding tank. Sebastian has always been particular about the water pressure. He installed an oversized tank and pump system last year. Then it's quite simple. I can synthesize the compound at my lab tomorrow. It dissolves completely in water, colorless, odorless, and tasteless. We add it to the tank before they arrive. Evelyn's excitement was building. The moment they take a hot shower, they'll activate the dye. Their hair, eyebrows, and any exposed skin will turn a brilliant shade of green. The image of Sebastian and his young model turning bright green was so absurd that Georgia couldn't help but smile. Would it be harmful to them? Not at all, Evelyn assured her. It's a compound we're developing for medical procedures, completely non-toxic, hypoallergenic, and temporary. It just happens to be very, very green. Georgia considered the plan. It was tempting, but still seemed incomplete. It's good, but they could still leave immediately after discovering what happened. True, Evelyn conceded. We'd need to make sure they couldn't just drive away at the first sign of trouble. Georgia tapped her fingers thoughtfully against the armrest. Sebastian always keeps spare gas cans in the storage shed at the cabin. He's paranoid about running out of fuel in such a remote location. Evelyn's eyes lit up. So we remove the gas cans before they arrive. And perhaps, she trailed off, clearly considering additional possibilities. Perhaps what? Perhaps we ensure they don't have enough fuel to make it back to town. Evelyn's expression turned thoughtful. William could help with that part. William Wallace, Evelyn's husband of 15 years, had been almost as constant a presence in Georgia's life as Evelyn herself. Quiet, but dependable, he had a mechanical aptitude that complemented his wife's chemical expertise. Would he be willing to get involved? Georgia asked. Are you kidding? He's always thought Sebastian was too full of himself. Evelyn pulled out her phone. Let me call him. 20 minutes later, William arrived, his expression serious, as Evelyn explained the situation. His initial shock at Sebastian's infidelity quickly gave way to practical considerations about their plan. Draining fuel isn't difficult, he confirmed, accepting the cup of coffee Georgia offered. But timing would be crucial. We'd need to do it after they arrive, but before they might need to leave. The three sat around Georgia's dining table, refining their strategy. William suggested disconnecting the cabin's generator as well, ensuring that even if the power went out, not uncommon in that remote area, they wouldn't have backup electricity. What about communication? Georgia wondered. The cabin has spotty cell service at best. Even better, Evelyn replied. They'll be isolated with their new green complexions. As their planning continued, Georgia remembered another detail. The electric account for the cabin is in my name. I handle all the utilities. Evelyn's eyebrows rose. Could you schedule a disconnection? I could, Georgia confirmed, a smile forming. I could request it for Saturday morning. The power company wouldn't reconnect until Monday at the earliest, especially in that remote location. This is coming together nicely. William nodded approvingly. But we should document everything. Document? Georgia questioned. Evidence, William clarified. If you're considering divorce, and I would in your position, having proof of his infidelity could be important. Georgia hadn't thought that far ahead, but William's practical suggestion made sense. How would we do that? Small cameras, he suggested. Not in private areas, he added quickly, but in the main living spaces, enough to confirm they were there together. The plan evolved throughout the afternoon, becoming more comprehensive with each passing hour. They would need to act quickly. Sebastian's romantic getaway was scheduled to begin in just 3 days. So, we're agreed, Evelyn summarized as evening approached. Tomorrow, I create the dye. Thursday, we drive to the cabin and set everything up. The water treatment, the cameras, removing the gas cans. Friday, Sebastian and his model arrive, presumably in the evening. Saturday morning, the power gets cut. And then they deal with the consequences of their actions. Georgia finished, a new resolve in her voice. After Evelyn and William left, promising to return the next day with supplies, Georgia sat alone in her living room. The initial shock of betrayal had transformed into something else, a cool determination to ensure that Sebastian's deception would not go unanswered. She picked up her phone and composed a text to Sebastian. Good luck with your presentation tomorrow. Will you be home for dinner? His reply came quickly. Don't count on it. Might need to work late again. Georgia set down her phone, no longer feeling the sharp sting his lies had caused earlier. Now, she felt only certainty about the path ahead. The next morning, Georgia went to work as usual, maintaining her normal routine as a literature professor at the local university. She taught her Victorian literature seminar with her customary passion, her students never suspecting the personal turmoil behind their professor's composed exterior. Between classes, she received a text from Evelyn. Compound synthesized. Completely safe. Completely green. We're good to go. That evening, Sebastian called to inform Georgia that he would be working late again. She responded with convincing concern about his heavy workload, even suggesting he take some time for himself that weekend. Actually, Sebastian said, his voice carrying the forced casualness of a practiced lie, That marketing retreat I mentioned is this weekend. I'll be leaving Friday afternoon, back Sunday evening." "Oh, that's right," Georgia replied, matching his tone. "Well, it sounds like exactly what you need. Some time away from everything. Thanks for understanding, hon. I knew you would." After they hung up, Georgia opened her laptop and logged into their shared cloud storage. There, in a folder labeled Cabin Information, she found what she was looking for: photos Sebastian had taken of Samantha during a supposed test shoot, clearly intended to document her modeling potential for the Westfield campaign. In reality, they were intimate, personal photographs taken in settings that had nothing to do with professional marketing. Georgia downloaded the images as additional evidence, then turned her attention to the utility company's website. With a few clicks, she scheduled a power disconnection for the cabin, citing planned renovations as the reason. The confirmation email indicated service would be discontinued at 7:30 Saturday morning and would not be restored until a technician could visit the property on Monday. Thursday arrived with a sense of purpose. Georgia called in sick to the university for the first time in years, claiming a migraine. By 9 o'clock, she, Evelyn, and William were on the road to the mountain cabin, a 2-hour drive into increasingly remote territory. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Evelyn asked as they turned onto the winding mountain road that led to the cabin. "It's not too late to back out." Georgia watched the familiar landscape pass by, the tall pines, the occasional glimpse of the lake through the trees, the rocky outcroppings that had featured in so many happy memories. Now all of it felt tainted by Sebastian's betrayal. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "He made his choice. Now he can live with the consequences." They arrived at the cabin shortly before noon. The rustic yet elegant structure stood in a small clearing, its large windows reflecting the surrounding forest. Georgia unlocked the door, momentarily overwhelmed by memories of weekends spent here with Sebastian. Holidays, anniversaries, spontaneous getaways when they both needed to escape the pressures of work. "Let's get started," she said, pushing aside the sentimentality. "We have a lot to do." For the next several hours, they worked methodically. William installed small, discreet cameras in the main living area, kitchen, and on the porch, areas that would document Sebastian and Samantha's presence without invading privacy. The footage would stream to a secure cloud account accessible only to Georgia. Evelyn tackled the water system, carefully adding her special compound to the holding tank, ensuring it was completely dissolved and undetectable. "The heat from a shower will activate it instantly," she explained. "Cold water won't trigger the reaction, so drinking it poses no issue." Meanwhile, Georgia located and removed the spare gas cans from the storage shed, replacing them with empty ones that looked identical. She also gathered any emergency supplies that might help them overcome their predicament too easily: flashlights, batteries, the emergency radio. By late afternoon, the cabin was prepared. As a final touch, William partially drained the fuel from the generator and disconnected a crucial wire, ensuring it wouldn't function even if they tried to use it. "That should do it," he announced, wiping his hands on a rag. "Even if they check the generator, they'll just think it's out of gas or malfunctioning." As they prepared to leave, Georgia took one last look around the cabin. On the mantel stood framed photos of her and Sebastian from happier times, hiking in the surrounding forest, laughing by the fireplace, celebrating his 40th birthday just last year. With deliberate movements, she turned these photos face down. "Ready?" Evelyn asked gently, watching her friend's face. Georgia nodded, a sense of closure settling over her. "Ready." On the drive back, they finalized the last details of their plan. William would return to the area on Friday evening, after Sebastian and Samantha had arrived, to drain most of the fuel from Sebastian's car, leaving just enough for them to start it and drive a short distance before it would sputter to a stop. "Are you sure you don't want to be there to see their faces?" Evelyn asked as they neared the city. Georgia shook her head. "No need. The cameras will capture everything, and besides," she added with a small smile, I have a feeling I'll see the results in person soon enough. Friday morning dawned bright and clear. Georgia went to work as usual, teaching her classes with apparent normalcy. At lunch, she received a text from Sebastian. Heading to the retreat soon. Will text when I arrive. Love you. The casual "love you," tacked on after plans to spend a romantic weekend with another woman, sent a fresh wave of anger through Georgia. She replied simply, "Drive safely." That evening, Georgia sat in her living room with Evelyn, a bottle of wine open between them, watching the security feed from the cabin on her laptop. At 6:23, Sebastian's car appeared on the driveway camera. Moments later, he emerged, followed by Samantha Campbell, even more stunning in person than in her photographs, with long blonde hair, a perfect figure, and the confident strut of someone accustomed to being admired. "Well, there they are," Evelyn muttered, refilling their glasses. The happy couple. They watched as Sebastian unlocked the cabin and carried in 2 overnight bags. Samantha followed, looking around appreciatively at the rustic luxury of the space. Sebastian gave her a tour, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, guiding her through what he clearly considered his domain. "He's showing her our bedroom," Georgia observed, her voice flat, as the camera caught them entering the master suite. The feed didn't extend into the room itself, but their intentions were obvious. At 7:45, William texted confirmation that he had successfully drained most of the fuel from Sebastian's car, left just enough to get them confused about when it happened. All set. Throughout the evening, Georgia and Evelyn watched intermittently as Sebastian and Samantha enjoyed a romantic dinner Sebastian had prepared in the cabin's kitchen. They opened an expensive bottle of wine, one Georgia recognized as a gift from her department chair, intended for a special occasion. They laughed, touched constantly, and eventually moved to the sofa where their affection became more intimate. "I think I've seen enough," Georgia said quietly, closing the laptop. "The cameras will keep recording." Evelyn squeezed her friend's hand. "Are you okay?" Georgia considered the question seriously. Was she okay? Her marriage was effectively over. The man she had loved and trusted for 13 years was currently in their cabin with another woman. Yet strangely, she felt calmer than she had in days. "I will be," she answered truthfully. "Tomorrow is when things get interesting." She reopened the laptop briefly to check one last time. The bathroom light was on, steam visible through the partially open door. The shower was running. "It's happening," Evelyn whispered, leaning forward. They waited, anticipation building. 10 minutes later, a shrill scream echoed through the cabin's speakers. Samantha Campbell emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her previously blonde hair now a vibrant shade of fluorescent green. Her eyebrows, visible patches of skin on her face, neck, and shoulders, all glowed with the same otherworldly green hue. Sebastian rushed to her, confusion evident on his face. They couldn't hear the exact words being exchanged, but Samantha's distress was obvious as she gesticulated wildly, pointing at her transformed appearance. When Sebastian entered the bathroom to investigate, Evelyn and Georgia exchanged knowing glances. Minutes later, he emerged, his own hair and eyebrows beginning to show the same green transformation where the water had touched him. "I almost feel sorry for them," Evelyn remarked, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Don't," Georgia replied, closing the laptop again. "Tomorrow is when the real consequences begin." Saturday morning arrived with the promise of revelations. Georgia woke early, her mind immediately turning to the cabin and what would unfold there in just a few hours. At precisely 7:30, according to the scheduled disconnection, the power to the cabin would be cut. She checked her phone. No messages from Sebastian, which was unsurprising given the circumstances he now found himself in. She made herself coffee and settled at the kitchen table with her laptop, opening the security feed. The cabin was still dark, the main living area empty. She checked the timestamp, 6:45 in the morning. They were likely still asleep, unaware of what the day would bring. At 7:28, Georgia watched with grim satisfaction as the lights in the kitchen flickered, then went out completely. The security cameras, running on their own battery power, continued recording in the growing morning light that filtered through the cabin's windows. It took almost an hour before any movement appeared on the feed. Sebastian emerged from the bedroom first, his hair standing up in tufts of bright green. Even through the camera, the fluorescent quality of the dye was striking, an unnatural, almost alien shade that contrasted sharply with his tanned skin. He headed straight for the coffee maker, only to discover it wouldn't turn on. Confusion crossed his face as he checked other appliances, then the light switches, confirming the power outage. Samantha appeared shortly after, wearing one of Sebastian's shirts, her green hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face, now fully visible in daylight, showed patches of the same green color around her hairline, eyebrows, and neck, anywhere the shower water had made sustained contact. Her expression was a mixture of horror and fury as she gestured at her appearance, clearly still distressed about her transformation. Georgia increased the volume, catching fragments of their conversation. "Must be something in the water system," Sebastian was saying, examining his own green-tinged hands. "This isn't funny, Sebastian." Samantha's voice was shrill with panic. "I have a photo shoot on Tuesday. My agent will drop me if I show up looking like this." I know. Look, it has to be temporary. We'll figure it out." Sebastian ran his hands through his vividly green hair. "First, let me check the power situation." Georgia watched as Sebastian moved through the cabin, checking the circuit breaker panel, then stepping outside to examine the external connection. His bewilderment was evident when he discovered the power had been officially disconnected. Back inside, Sebastian reached for his phone, then frowned, checking the signal. "No service," he muttered, just loudly enough for the microphone to pick up. "What do you mean, no service?" Samantha demanded, joining him in the kitchen. "Cell reception is spotty up here," Sebastian explained, moving to different parts of the cabin, holding his phone up, searching for bars. "Sometimes you can catch a signal on the east side porch." They both moved outside, beyond the range of the interior microphones. Georgia switched to the exterior camera, watching as Sebastian paced the deck, holding his phone at various angles, finally finding a weak signal. His posture changed as he made a call, speaking animatedly into the phone for several minutes before hanging up with obvious frustration. When they returned inside, Sebastian's expression had darkened considerably. "The power company says it was a scheduled disconnection," he explained to Samantha, his voice tight with anger. "Apparently, someone called and requested it for renovations." "Renovations?" Samantha repeated incredulously. "Who would do that?" Sebastian was silent for a long moment, his expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "The account is in Georgia's name." A chill seemed to pass through Samantha as understanding dawned. "Your wife? Are you saying your wife did this?" "I don't know," Sebastian admitted, though doubt had clearly entered his mind. "It could be a mistake." "A mistake?" Samantha gestured wildly at her green hair and face. "And this? Is this a mistake too?" "I don't know what happened with the water," Sebastian insisted, though he sounded less convinced. "Look, we need to stay calm. The power company can't reconnect until Monday, but we can drive back to the city." "Then let's go," Samantha demanded, already gathering her things. "I need to see a doctor, or a hair specialist, or someone who can fix this." Georgia shifted her attention to the driveway camera, watching as Sebastian and Samantha emerged from the cabin 20 minutes later, both having made futile attempts to cover their green features. Sebastian wore a baseball cap that did little to hide the green hair protruding from the sides, while Samantha had wrapped a scarf around her head, large sunglasses covering part of her face. They loaded their overnight bags into Sebastian's car, their movements sharp with tension. Georgia could almost feel the anger radiating from Samantha as she slammed the passenger door. Sebastian started the engine, which roared to life without issue. Georgia smiled to herself, knowing what would happen next. The car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the mountain road. 15 minutes later, the camera caught Sebastian trudging back up the long driveway, alone and visibly furious. The car had obviously run out of fuel exactly as William had planned, just far enough from the cabin to be an exhausting walk back, but nowhere near civilization. Sebastian burst back into the cabin, immediately heading for the storage shed where he kept the spare gas cans. Georgia switched cameras again, watching as he discovered the empty cans. His reaction was immediate and visceral, kicking one of the cans across the shed, then bracing himself against the wall, head bowed in defeat. When he returned to the cabin, Samantha was waiting, her expression thunderous. "Well," she demanded. "The gas cans are empty," Sebastian admitted, sinking onto the sofa. "And we're too far from anything to walk. The nearest gas station is 15 miles down the mountain." "This can't be happening," Samantha moaned, collapsing into an armchair. "Are you telling me we're stuck here? With no power, no transportation, and looking like this?" She gestured at her green features. "Just until we can get help," Sebastian assured her, though his confidence was clearly shaken. "Let me try to call Georgia. Maybe she can drive up with some gas." Georgia's phone rang a moment later. She let it go to voicemail, watching Sebastian's frustration grow on the security feed as his call went unanswered. He tried again, and this time Georgia decided to answer. "Hello?" she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Georgia, thank God." Sebastian's voice carried a forced casualness that didn't match his desperate expression on camera. "Look, I'm having a bit of an emergency at the retreat." "Oh?" Georgia feigned concern. "What's wrong?" "Well, there seems to have been a mix-up with the power at the cabin," Sebastian began carefully. "The power company says someone scheduled a disconnection." "The cabin?" Georgia allowed confusion to enter her voice. "Why are you at the cabin? I thought you were at a marketing retreat." The silence that followed was deafening. On screen, Georgia watched Sebastian's face drain of color beneath the green tinge. He stammered, clearly scrambling for an explanation. "The retreat was cancelled last minute, so I decided to use the weekend to get some work done in peace. The cabin seemed perfect." "I see," Georgia replied, her tone cooling slightly. "Well, that's strange about the power. I haven't scheduled any disconnection. Could you call them? They said the account is in your name." "I would, but it's Saturday. Their offices won't reopen until Monday." This was a lie, but Sebastian had no way of knowing that. His frustration was visible on the security feed. "Georgia, this is serious. I have no power, and now my car's out of gas. I'm stranded up here." "How did you run out of gas?" Georgia asked innocently. "Didn't you fill up before driving all the way up there?" "I did. That's the strange part. The tank was full when I arrived, but now it's completely empty. And the spare cans are empty too." "Oh, that is strange," Georgia agreed, watching as Samantha paced in the background, her green hair now fully visible as she'd removed the scarf in the privacy of the cabin. "Listen, I have a faculty meeting in 20 minutes that I can't miss. Why don't I drive up there afterward? Say around 4 o'clock? Sebastian's relief was palpable. "That would be great, thank you." "Of course." "Oh, and Sebastian?" Georgia added, her voice deliberately casual. "Is there anything else I should know? You sound stressed." Another pause, longer this time. On screen, Sebastian turned away from Samantha, lowering his voice. "No, nothing else. Just hurry, please. I'll see you this afternoon then." Georgia ended the call, setting her phone down with deliberate calm despite the vindication surging through her. Beside her, Evelyn had been watching the entire exchange, both on screen and listening to Georgia's side of the conversation. "That was masterful," she commented. "He has no idea what's coming." "No, he doesn't," Georgia agreed, closing the laptop. "But I think I'll let them stew for a few more hours before I head up there." "Are you sure you want to go alone?" Evelyn asked, concern evident in her voice. "William or I could come with you." Georgia shook her head. "This is something I need to do myself. But thank you for everything." Choberkoid. After Evelyn left, Georgia spent the morning preparing for her confrontation with Sebastian. She gathered printouts of the text messages between him and Samantha, screenshots of their planned weekend, and the falsified marketing retreat agenda Sebastian had created as his cover story. She also prepared divorce papers, having consulted with an attorney friend the previous day. At 3 o'clock, she dressed with care, a casual but elegant outfit that made her feel confident and in control. She applied her makeup with precision, ensuring she looked her best for what would undoubtedly be a difficult encounter. Before leaving, she checked the security feed one last time. The atmosphere in the cabin had deteriorated significantly. Sebastian and Samantha were no longer speaking to each other, occupying opposite ends of the living room in stony silence. The strain of their situation, trapped together, visibly green, without power or escape, had clearly taken its toll on whatever romance had brought them there. The 2-hour drive to the cabin gave Georgia time to rehearse what she would say, how she would confront Sebastian's betrayal without losing her composure. By the time she turned onto the familiar mountain road, a sense of calm determination had settled over her. This was not about emotional outbursts or recriminations. This was about consequences. She parked her car at the base of the driveway, deciding to walk the remaining distance. Through the trees, she could see Sebastian's stranded vehicle about a quarter-mile down the main road, exactly where William had calculated it would run out of fuel. As Georgia approached the cabin, she could see Sebastian through the large front windows, pacing anxiously. He rushed outside the moment he heard her footsteps on the gravel. "Georgia, thank God you're here," he began, then froze as he realized she had stopped several feet away, staring at his green hair and eyebrows with exaggerated shock. "Sebastian," Georgia said slowly, her voice steady. "What happened to your hair?" His hand flew up to his head, as though he'd momentarily forgotten his transformed appearance. There's something wrong with the water system," he explained hastily. "Some kind of chemical reaction or algae. That's not important right now." "Did you bring gas for the car?" Georgia made a show of looking around, feigning confusion. "Where are your colleagues? I thought you came up here to work." They couldn't make it," Sebastian stammered. "Like I said, the retreat was cancelled, so I came alone to focus on the Westfield presentation." At that moment, Samantha appeared in the doorway behind him, apparently drawn by the sound of voices. Despite her attempts to cover her green features with a scarf and large sunglasses, the transformation was unmistakable. Sebastian's face went pale beneath its green tinge. "Georgia, I can explain." "Can you?" Georgia interrupted, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Can you really explain why you're at our cabin with a woman who isn't your wife? Can you explain why you lied about a marketing retreat? Or why you've been having an affair for the past 4 months?" The color drained completely from Sebastian's face. "How did you—" "No," Georgia finished for him. "I know everything, Sebastian. The dinners at Le Petit Jardin, the hotel meetings, the text messages." She paused, looking directly at Samantha. "You must be Samantha Campbell. I'd say it's nice to meet you, but under the circumstances, that would be a lie. And there have been enough lies already, don't you think?" Samantha took a step backward, clearly unprepared for this direct confrontation. "You did this to us," she said, gesturing at her green-tinged features. "Didn't you?" "The green is quite becoming," Georgia replied evenly. "Consider it a physical manifestation of the toxicity you've both been hiding." Sebastian moved toward Georgia, his expression pleading. "Georgia, please, this isn't what it looks like, isn't it?" Georgia raised an eyebrow. "Because it looks exactly like my husband brought his mistress to our cabin for a romantic weekend, while telling me he was at a business retreat." She pulled out her phone, showing him the texts she'd discovered. "It looks exactly like you've been lying to me for months." Sebastian's shoulders sagged in defeat. Behind him, Samantha had retreated further into the cabin, her initial outrage fading into uncomfortable realization as she witnessed the unraveling of Sebastian's marriage in real time. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Sebastian said quietly. "And yet you made choice after choice that led exactly here," Georgia replied, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "You chose to pursue Samantha. You chose to lie to me. You chose to bring her to our cabin. And now, You're facing the consequences of those choices." She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside are divorce papers. "I've already consulted an attorney. You'll find the terms are quite reasonable. I'm not interested in punishing you financially or dragging this out." Sebastian stared at the envelope as though it might burn him. "Georgia, can we please talk about this? In private?" "There's nothing to discuss," Georgia said firmly. "Our marriage is over. It ended the moment you decided someone else was more important than the vows we made." "What about the gas?" Sebastian asked, desperation entering his voice. "We can't stay here like this." Georgia reached into her purse and removed a small container of makeup remover wipes. The green dye is activated by heat and binds to keratin, hair and the outer layer of skin. It's completely harmless and will fade naturally in about 2 weeks, but these will help remove it from skin more quickly. She set the package on the porch railing. "As for the gas, there's a can in my trunk, enough to get your car to the nearest station." Relief flooded Sebastian's face, quickly replaced by confusion. "How did you know about the dye? About the chemicals?" "Evelyn is a research chemist," Georgia reminded him. "Her specialty is dermal reactive compounds. Quite a coincidence, isn't it?" Understanding dawned in Sebastian's eyes. "You planned all of this. The dye, the power, the gas. It was all you." "Consider it my parting gift," Georgia replied, a small, sad smile touching her lips, a reminder that actions have consequences. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the man she had loved for 13 years. "You know what the saddest part is, Sebastian? I would have forgiven almost anything if you'd been honest, but you didn't respect me enough for that." As Georgia walked back down the driveway, she heard the cabin door open behind her. Expecting Sebastian, she was surprised to see Samantha hurrying toward her, green features partially hidden behind her scarf and sunglasses. "Georgia!" "Wait," the younger woman called, her voice lacking its earlier hostility. Georgia paused, turning to face her husband's mistress with calm dignity. "I didn't know," Samantha said, her voice low and urgent. "About the cabin being yours, I mean. He told me it belonged to a friend who let him use it. And he said things weren't good between you two, that you were practically separated." Georgia wasn't surprised by Sebastian's lies, but the pain of them still cut deep. "And you believed him? The classic story told by married men to younger women." Samantha flinched at the assessment. "I deserve that, but I want you to know I'm not staying with him. Whatever we had, it's over." "Oh, that's between you and him," Georgia replied, finding she had no particular animosity toward this woman who had been, in many ways, another victim of Sebastian's deceptions. "But if I were you, I'd be more careful about who I trust in the future." Samantha nodded, unconsciously touching her green-tinged hair. "The dye, will it really fade in 2 weeks?" "Yes," Georgia confirmed, "though I'd recommend canceling any photo shoots until then." A hint of a smile touched Samantha's lips. "I think I can manage that." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Georgia studied the younger woman for a moment. "We all make mistakes, Samantha. The question is what we learn from them." With that, Georgia continued to her car, feeling lighter with each step. She retrieved the gas can from her trunk and set it at the base of the driveway, then got into her vehicle without looking back at the cabin or the 2 green-tinged figures watching her departure. As she drove down the mountain road, Georgia felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what she had lost, anger at Sebastian's betrayal, but also a surprising sense of liberation. For 13 years, she had been a devoted wife, supporting Sebastian's career and dreams, often at the expense of her own ambitions. Now, she was free to rediscover who Georgia Hammond was outside of her marriage. Her phone rang, Evelyn checking in. "How did it go?" her friend asked anxiously. "Exactly as it needed to," Georgia replied, watching the mountain cabin recede in her rearview mirror. "Sebastian and Samantha are stranded with gas, green as emeralds, and I delivered the divorce papers." "And how are you feeling?" Georgia considered the question as she navigated the winding road back toward the city and her future. Like I've finally stopped allowing someone else's choices to determine my worth. The sun was setting as Georgia reached the main highway, casting long shadows across the road ahead. For the first time in days, she felt a genuine smile touch her lips. Sebastian's betrayal had broken her heart, but in that breaking, she had rediscovered her own strength. The following week unfolded with a surreal quality for Georgia. She returned to her teaching position at the university, delivering lectures on Victorian literature to eager students who had no idea their professor's life had been upended. In the classroom, discussing the moral complexities of Bronte and Dickens, Georgia found welcome distraction from her personal turmoil. Sebastian had not returned to their home after the confrontation at the cabin. A terse text message informed her he would be staying elsewhere until they could discuss things rationally. Georgia had responded with equal brevity, suggesting he contact her attorney rather than her directly. The distance between them, once unimaginable in their 13 years together, now seemed as vast and unbridgeable as an ocean. On Wednesday afternoon, Georgia was grading papers in her campus office when a knock at the door interrupted her concentration. She looked up to find Amelia Hammond, Sebastian's mother, standing in the doorway. At 65, Amelia remained an elegant woman, her silver hair styled in a sleek bob, her posture as straight as a dancer's, despite her years. "Amelia," Georgia said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "No, I imagine not." Amelia's voice carried its usual warmth, though her eyes reflected concern. "May I come in?" Georgia gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Of course." Amelia settled into the seat, studying Georgia with the perceptive gaze that had always made Georgia feel completely transparent. "Sebastian called me," she said without preamble. "He told me what happened, or at least, his version of it." Georgia set aside the student essays she'd been grading. "And what version is that?" "That you discovered his indiscretion." Amelia chose her words carefully, "and retaliated by turning him green and stranding him at the cabin." Cheat. Despite everything, Georgia felt a smile tug at her lips. "That's actually a fairly accurate summary." "He's still quite green, you know," Amelia remarked, a hint of something that might have been amusement flickering in her eyes. "Had to cancel client meetings. Claims it's an allergic reaction to a new shampoo." "It will fade," Georgia assured her, "in about 2 weeks." Amelia nodded, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt. "I don't condone infidelity, Georgia. Never have. My late husband and I had 42 years together without either of us straying." She paused, meeting Georgia's gaze directly. "But I also wouldn't have expected such creativity in your response." Georgia leaned back in her chair, considering how to explain her actions to this woman who had been more like a mother to her than her own had ever been. "I could have confronted him immediately," she acknowledged. "That would have been the sensible approach. But after 13 years of marriage, I deserved more than a standard confrontation and the typical denials." "You wanted him to face consequences," Amelia observed. "I wanted him to understand exactly what he was throwing away," Georgia corrected gently. "And yes, I wanted consequences that couldn't be explained away or minimized." Amelia was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Sebastian always had a tendency to avoid difficult emotions," she finally said. "Even as a child, he'd deflect or charm his way out of facing the results of his poor decisions. I suppose I hoped he'd outgrow that." The observation struck Georgia as profoundly true. Throughout their marriage, Sebastian had avoided uncomfortable conversations, choosing instead to placate or distract rather than engage with problems directly. She had accommodated this tendency, often at the cost of her own needs being addressed. "What happens now?" Amelia asked softly. "Divorce," Georgia answered, the word still strange on her tongue despite its inevitability. "I've had papers drawn up. It's just a matter of time." Amelia nodded, a sadness settling in the fine lines around her eyes. I want you to know that whatever happens between you and Sebastian, you will always be family to me." She reached across the desk, covering Georgia's hand with her own. "You were the daughter I never had. That doesn't change because my son was a fool." The unexpected declaration brought tears to Georgia's eyes. "Thank you, Amelia. That means more than you know." When Amelia left, Georgia remained at her desk, staring unseeing at the stack of essays before her. She had been prepared for anger from Sebastian's mother, perhaps even blame. Instead, she had received understanding and continued affection. It was a gift she hadn't realized she needed. That evening, Georgia met Evelyn and William for dinner at a small Italian restaurant they had frequented for years. As the waiter poured their wine, Evelyn raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said simply. Georgia clinked her glass against her friend's, feeling a surge of gratitude for their unwavering support. "And to true friends who help you turn cheating husbands green." William laughed, his usually reserved demeanor softening. "I drove by his office building yesterday," he admitted, "caught a glimpse of him getting into his car. The green has faded a bit, but it's still quite noticeable." "I heard from a colleague that Samantha Campbell canceled 3 photo shoots," Evelyn added, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Claimed she had a medical emergency." "Well, it was technically a chemical reaction," Georgia pointed out with a small smile. As they enjoyed their meal, the conversation shifted from Sebastian's predicament to Georgia's plans for the future. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider possibilities that had seemed remote during her marriage. "I've been thinking about applying for the fellowship program in London," she confessed, the idea having taken shape over the past few days. "The one I passed up 3 years ago because Sebastian didn't want to move. The Victorian Literature Fellowship at Oxford?" Evelyn leaned forward, excitement lighting her features. "Georgia, that would be perfect for you." "It's highly competitive," Georgia cautioned, though the prospect energized her. "And I'd need to finish my doctoral thesis first. The one you put on hold when Sebastian got the promotion to executive creative director," William noted, his tone neutral but his implication clear. Georgia nodded, remembering how easily she had set aside her academic ambitions to support Sebastian's career. At the time, it had seemed like a reasonable compromise. Now, she recognized it as one of many sacrifices that had gone unmatched and unappreciated. "The application deadline is in 3 months," she said, making a decision. "I'm going to finish my thesis and apply." The rest of the evening passed in animated discussion of Georgia's academic prospects and the logistics of potentially relocating to England. For the first time since discovering Sebastian's betrayal, Georgia felt genuine excitement about the future. A future shaped by her own dreams and ambitions rather than accommodations to someone else's. When she returned home that night, the house felt different. No longer a shrine to a failed marriage, but a transitional space, a cocoon from which she would eventually emerge transformed. Georgia moved through the rooms, noting how many design choices reflected Sebastian's preferences rather than her own. The modern, minimalist furniture that had always felt slightly cold to her. The abstract art he had insisted was important for cultivating the right image. Even the muted color palette had been his selection, despite her preference for warmer tones. In the study, Georgia paused before the bookshelves where her half-completed doctoral thesis sat in a neatly labeled binder. She pulled it down, running her fingers over the title page. Redemptive Suffering and Moral Evolution in Victorian Women's Literature. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years analyzing how fictional women transformed suffering into strength, only to find herself living a similar narrative. She carried the binder to the desk and opened her laptop. It was nearly midnight, but she felt more awake, more alive than she had in months. For the next 2 hours, Georgia reacquainted herself with her academic work, making notes, identifying areas that needed updating, planning the path to completion. By the time she finally went to bed, a sense of purpose had replaced the hollow ache that had been her constant companion since discovering Sebastian's betrayal. The following morning, Georgia woke to a text message from Sebastian. "We need to talk. Face to face. Please." She stared at the screen, considering her response. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the emotional distance that had protected her these past days. But another part recognized that a direct conversation was inevitable if they were to move forward with the divorce in a civilized manner. "My office hours end at 4 today. You can meet me at the campus coffee shop at 4:30, she replied, setting clear boundaries around the encounter. Sebastian's answer came immediately. "I'll be there, thank you." Georgia approached her day with a renewed sense of control. She taught her morning class with particular passion, engaging her students in a lively discussion of Jane Eyre's moral evolution. During her office hours, she met with 2 graduate students to discuss their thesis projects, offering guidance with a clarity of thought that felt refreshing after months of emotional fog. At precisely 4:30, Georgia entered the campus coffee shop, immediately spotting Sebastian at a corner table. Even from a distance, she could see the lingering effects of Evelyn's special dye. His hair still carried a distinct green tint, though it had faded from the vibrant fluorescence of 4 days ago to a more muted sage color. His eyebrows matched, giving him an otherworldly appearance that might have been comical under different circumstances. As Georgia approached, she noted other changes as well. Sebastian looked tired. The confident charm that had always seemed so effortless now notably absent. He stood when he saw her, an automatic gesture of politeness that felt jarringly normal in the context of their shattered relationship. "Georgia," he said, his voice carrying a tentative quality she had rarely heard from him. "Thank you for meeting me." She took the seat opposite him, maintaining a composed expression despite the tumult of emotions his presence evoked. "You wanted to talk? So, talk." Sebastian ran a hand through his green-tinged hair, a nervous gesture that betrayed his discomfort. "First, I want to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry. What I did was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Georgia agreed, her tone neutral. She had no intention of making this conversation easier for him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Sebastian continued, his gaze fixed on the table between them rather than meeting her eyes. "About why I did what I did. It wasn't about you or any failure in our marriage. It was about my own insecurities, my need for validation." Georgia listened without comment, noting the familiar pattern of Sebastian's self-analysis, articulate, seemingly insightful, yet ultimately self-absolving. He had always been skilled at crafting narratives that positioned himself as sympathetic, even when he was clearly in the wrong. "The thing with Samantha," he went on, "it wasn't serious. It was just a—" "Don't," Georgia interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "Don't minimize it. You had an affair for 4 months. You brought her to our cabin. Those aren't the actions of someone engaged in something not serious." Sebastian had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. I'm sorry." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, badly, is that I made a terrible mistake, and I want to know if there's any chance we can work through this. Go to counseling. Rebuild trust. Try to save our marriage." The request caught Georgia by surprise. She had expected recriminations about the green dye incident, perhaps negotiations about the divorce settlement, not this apparent desire for reconciliation. "Why?" she asked simply. Sebastian looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Why do you want to save our marriage?" Georgia clarified. "Is it because you truly love me and can't imagine your life without me? Or is it because divorce is inconvenient, embarrassing, and might damage your professional image?" Her directness seemed to unsettle him. "That's not fair, Georgia. Of course I love you." "Do you?" she pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Because when you love someone, truly love them, you don't betray them repeatedly over months. You don't lie to their face day after day. You don't bring your mistress to a place that holds cherished memories for both of you." Sebastian flinched at the word mistress, but didn't contradict her. "People make mistakes," he said quietly, "even terrible ones. That doesn't mean they don't love." Georgia studied the man across from her. the man she had once believed would be her partner for life. There was a time when his words would have swayed her, when her desire to preserve their marriage would have overridden her sense of self-worth. That time had passed. "I believe you're sorry," she said finally, "but I don't believe you're sorry you had an affair. You're sorry you got caught and faced consequences. You're sorry your hair is green and your comfortable life has been disrupted. That's not the same thing." Sebastian's expression hardened slightly. "So that's it? 13 years of marriage, thrown away without even trying to fix things?" "Our marriage ended the moment you decided to betray our vows," Georgia replied evenly. "What you're asking for isn't a chance to save our marriage. It's a chance to erase the consequences of your actions. And turning me green? Stranding me at the cabin? What were those, if not consequences?" There was a hint of the old Sebastian in his tone now, defensive, slightly indignant. "Those were lessons," Georgia corrected. "Lessons about how it feels to be vulnerable, exposed, unable to control the narrative. Lessons about how actions have repercussions that can't always be charmed away or minimized." She gathered her bag, preparing to leave. "The divorce papers are fair, Sebastian. I'm not asking for anything beyond what's reasonable. Sign them, and we can both move forward with our lives. And if I contest the divorce?" The question held a hint of challenge. Georgia met his gaze directly. "Then you'll extend a painful process for both of us, spend considerable money on legal fees, and eventually end up with essentially the same outcome. The only difference will be how much additional damage we inflict on each other along the way." The practical assessment seemed to deflate whatever fight had momentarily risen in Sebastian. His shoulders sagged slightly. "I never meant to hurt you, Georgia." "I know," she acknowledged, softening her tone slightly. "That's perhaps the saddest part of all this. You were so focused on your own desires. You never stopped to consider how your actions would affect me. That's not love, Sebastian. That's selfishness." She stood, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I really do. But you won't find it with me, not anymore." As Georgia walked away, she felt Sebastian's eyes following her, but he made no move to stop her, offered no last, desperate plea. Perhaps he had finally recognized the immutability of what had transpired between them. Or perhaps, true to form, he had already begun constructing a new narrative in which he was not the villain of the story. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus quad. Georgia took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The conversation with Sebastian had provided no dramatic catharsis, no satisfying moment of vindication. Instead, it had simply confirmed what she already knew. Their marriage was over, not because of a single act of betrayal, but because the foundation of trust and mutual respect had been irreparably broken. As Georgia walked toward the faculty parking lot, her phone chimed with a notification. An email from the department chair confirming approval of her sabbatical request for the following semester to complete her doctoral thesis. Another step toward reclaiming the academic ambitions she had set aside during her marriage. That night, alone in the house that had once been theirs, but now felt increasingly like hers alone, Georgia began the process of transformation. She moved Sebastian's remaining clothes from the master bedroom closet to the guest room, boxed his personal items from the bathroom, and removed his framed credentials from the study wall, not erasing him, but creating space for herself to expand into. In the living room, she rearranged the furniture, moving the austere modern sofa Sebastian had insisted upon to a less prominent position, and bringing forward the comfortable reading chair she had always preferred. Small changes, symbolic perhaps, but they represented a reclamation of space and identity that felt profoundly important. As she worked, Georgia thought about the path that had led her here. The young, brilliant literature student who had fallen in love with the charismatic marketing executive. The gradual compromises she had made, always framed as reasonable accommodations to their shared life, but increasingly one-sided. the slow dimming of her own ambitions as she prioritized Sebastian's career and needs above her own. The betrayal had been painful, devastating in the moment, but in its aftermath, Georgia was discovering something unexpected, a renewed sense of self, a clarity of purpose that had been missing for years. Like the Victorian heroines she studied, she was finding that suffering, properly alchemized, could indeed become a catalyst for moral and personal evolution. 3 days later, Georgia received notification from her attorney that Sebastian had signed the divorce papers without contest. The green hair incident had apparently made him more amenable to a quick, quiet dissolution of their marriage. Within 6 weeks, their 13-year union would be legally ended, their assets divided according to the terms Georgia had proposed. That same evening, Evelyn and William invited Georgia to dinner to celebrate her academic sabbatical approval. As they raised their glasses in another toast, Evelyn's expression turned serious. "Have you ever wondered," she asked thoughtfully, "what might have happened if you hadn't discovered Sebastian's affair? If he had continued his deception, and you had remained unaware?" Georgia considered the question, turning it over in her mind like a complex equation seeking resolution. "I would have continued living a life built on illusion," she finally answered, "believing in a marriage that existed only in my perception, not in reality." "Some might argue that ignorance is bliss," William observed, though his tone suggested he didn't share this perspective. "Is it?" Georgia challenged gently. "Living in a false reality, investing in a relationship where the trust only flows one way? That's not bliss. It's unconsciousness." Evelyn nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze Georgia's hand. "I've always admired your clarity, even in the midst of chaos. Lesser women would have simply confronted him, then fallen apart." "I did fall apart," Georgia admitted with a small smile. "Just privately, and not for very long. Then I got creative." They laughed together, the sound genuine and warm in the restaurant's intimate atmosphere. As the evening progressed, their conversation shifted away from Sebastian and the divorce, focusing instead on Georgia's academic future and the possibilities that lay ahead. Walking home later, Georgia passed a boutique with a window display featuring an elegant yellow dress, vibrant, bold, and utterly unlike anything she would have chosen during her marriage. On impulse, she went inside and tried it on, studying her reflection in the fitting room mirror. The color brought out the auburn highlights in her hair, made her green eyes seem more vivid, her skin more luminous. "It's perfect on you," the saleswoman commented. "Are you looking for something for a special occasion?" Georgia smoothed the fabric, feeling its quality beneath her fingertips. "No special occasion," she replied. "Just a new chapter." She purchased the dress, carrying it home with a sense of quiet celebration. It was a small thing, perhaps insignificant in the grand scheme of her transformation, but it represented something important, a willingness to choose boldly, to step into visibility rather than accommodating herself to someone else's preferences. That night, as Georgia prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. Opening it, she found a brief message from Samantha Campbell. "The green is finally gone. Thought you might want to know we're both free of it now." Georgia stared at the text, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. After a moment's consideration, she typed, "I hope whatever color comes next suits you better." She set her phone aside, reflecting on the strange connection she now shared with a woman who had once been merely a name in Sebastian's text messages. Not friendship, certainly, but a kind of mutual recognition. Two women who had experienced Sebastian Hammond's capacity for deception from different angles. As Georgia drifted toward sleep, she found herself thinking not about Sebastian or Samantha, or even the divorce, but about the Victorian Literature Fellowship at Oxford, about the doctoral thesis waiting for completion on her desk, about the yellow dress hanging in her closet. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending was revealing itself to be something else entirely. A beginning, unexpected, but full of possibility. The green dye had faded from Sebastian's hair, just as he would eventually fade from the central place he had occupied in her life. What remained was Georgia herself, not diminished by his betrayal, but clarified by it, like a text whose true meaning emerges only upon careful, critical reading. 3 months passed with the steady rhythm of seasons changing. Autumn gave way to winter, the university campus transformed by a blanket of snow that muffled footsteps and created an atmosphere of peaceful contemplation. For Georgia, this period had been one of profound transition. Not just the legal dissolution of her marriage, which had been finalized 6 weeks after Sebastian signed the uncontested divorce papers, but a deeper, more personal metamorphosis. The house that had once been their shared domain now reflected Georgia's preferences alone. Gone were the stark minimalist furnishings Sebastian had favored, replaced by comfortable, elegant pieces in warm tones. The walls, once a uniform slate gray, now showcased rich, vibrant colors in different rooms, deep teal in the living room, a soft terracotta in the dining area, calming sage in her bedroom. Each change, however small, represented a reclamation of space and identity. Most significant of all had been Georgia's return to her academic work. With single-minded focus, she had completed her doctoral thesis, submitting it ahead of schedule to her committee. The defense was scheduled for the following week, the final hurdle before she could apply for the Oxford Fellowship with her newly minted doctorate in hand. On a crisp Saturday morning in January, Georgia sat at her kitchen table reviewing her presentation notes for the thesis defense. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, accumulating on the windowsill like a frame around the winter landscape. The doorbell's unexpected chime pulled her attention from her work. Opening the front door, Georgia found Amelia Hammond standing on her porch, elegant as always in a camel-colored wool coat, a colorful scarf protecting her from the winter chill. "Amelia," Georgia greeted her, genuine warmth in her voice. Despite the divorce, she and Sebastian's mother had maintained their close relationship, meeting occasionally for lunch or coffee. "This is a surprise. A good one, I hope," Amelia replied with a smile. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. I brought those spiced muffins you like from Hartwell's Bakery." She held up a paper bag that emanated enticing aromas of cinnamon and nutmeg. Georgia welcomed her inside, taking her coat and scarf. "You know I can never resist Hartwell's muffins. I'll make us some tea." In the kitchen, they fell into easy conversation as Georgia prepared a pot of Earl Grey, Amelia's favorite. There was a comfortable familiarity between them that transcended the complicated dynamics of family relationships altered by divorce. "I hear your thesis defense is next week," Amelia said, accepting the steaming mug Georgia offered. "Sebastian mentioned it when I spoke with him yesterday." Georgia raised an eyebrow, surprised that Sebastian was keeping track of her academic progress. "Yes, Wednesday morning. If all goes well, I'll have those 3 letters after my name by noon." "There's no if about it," Amelia stated with absolute confidence. "Your committee would be fools to find any fault with your work. Your analysis of redemptive suffering in Victorian literature was brilliant when you first conceived it years ago. I can only imagine how it's evolved since then." Georgia smiled, touched by Amelia's unwavering support. "Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, enjoying the tea and muffins as snow continued to fall outside. Finally, Amelia set down her mug with deliberate care. "I didn't just come for a social visit," she admitted. "I wanted to talk to you about Sebastian." Georgia tensed slightly, uncertain where this conversation might lead. "What about him?" "He's moved to Chicago," Amelia said. "Took a position with a new agency there. Started last week." The news caught Georgia by surprise. Though they shared mutual friends and Amelia as a connection, she and Sebastian had maintained a careful distance since signing the divorce papers. She knew he had moved out of their social circle, renting an apartment downtown, but had heard nothing about relocation plans. "That's unexpected," Georgia commented neutrally. though I suppose a fresh start makes sense. Amelia nodded, studying George's face with perceptive eyes. He's been doing a lot of thinking these past months. Therapy, actually. His own choice, which surprised me. Georgia absorbed this information, finding it difficult to imagine Sebastian voluntarily seeking therapy. He had always resisted the idea, claiming he could manage his own issues without professional help. "That's good for him," she said sincerely. Whatever had transpired between them, she didn't wish Sebastian ill. "He asked me to give you something," Amelia continued, reaching into her handbag and withdrawing an envelope. "He said he wrote it several times, but wasn't sure if you'd read it, if he sent it directly." Georgia accepted the envelope with hesitation, seeing her name written in Sebastian's distinctive handwriting. "I'm not sure I want to read this, Amelia." "I understand," the older woman acknowledged, "and you certainly don't have to. But for what it's worth, I think it might provide some closure for both of you." She reached across the table, briefly covering George's hand with her own. "He's not asking for reconciliation or forgiveness, just understanding, perhaps." After Amelia left, Georgia sat alone at her kitchen table, the unopened letter before her like an artifact from a previous life. Part of her wanted to discard it unread. What could Sebastian possibly say that would matter now? Yet curiosity and a sense that proper endings required acknowledgement kept her from dismissing it entirely. With deliberate movements, Georgia opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Georgia, I've written this letter a dozen times, always ending up with something that feels inadequate or self-serving. I'll try to be direct and honest, qualities I should have valued more during our marriage. First, I want to acknowledge the pain I caused you. My affair with Samantha wasn't a momentary lapse or a meaningless fling. It was a sustained betrayal of your trust, our vows, and the life we built together. There's no excuse for it, though I spent months creating elaborate justifications in my mind. Since our divorce, I've been working with a therapist to understand why I sabotaged our marriage. The easy explanation would be midlife crisis or simple selfishness, but the truth is more complicated and less flattering. I was afraid of vulnerability, of being truly known. Throughout our marriage, you saw me clearly, my insecurities, my weaknesses, my failures. Samantha didn't. With her, I could be the idealized version of myself I preferred to believe in. The green hair incident, as I've come to call it, forced me to confront reality in a way I couldn't charm or talk my way out of. It was humiliating, yes, but also illuminating. For perhaps the first time, I had to face the direct consequences of my actions without deflection or minimization. I'm moving to Chicago to start over professionally and personally. Before leaving, I wanted to tell you that I understand now why our marriage couldn't be saved. It wasn't because you couldn't forgive me, but because I had compromised the foundation of trust that made our relationship possible in the first place. You deserve the happiness and success that I know awaits you. I've heard about your completed thesis and the Oxford Fellowship possibility. You were always brilliant, Georgia, in ways I didn't always appreciate or support, as I should have. I won't ask for forgiveness. That would be presumptuous after everything that's happened. But I did want you to know that I recognize my failings and am working to become someone who wouldn't repeat them. Wishing you every happiness, Sebastian. Georgia set the letter down, surprised to find her eyes dry. A few months ago, such words might have sparked anger, or pain, or even hope for reconciliation. Now, they simply felt like the epilogue to a story already concluded. Meaningful, but no longer defining her present reality. She carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its envelope, then placed it in a drawer of her desk. Not displayed prominently as something to revisit regularly, but not discarded either. A piece of her history, acknowledged and filed away. The following Wednesday, Georgia stood before her doctoral committee, presenting the culmination of years of research and writing. Her thesis on redemptive suffering and moral evolution in Victorian women's literature had evolved into a nuanced analysis that drew parallels between fictional characters' transformative experiences and modern psychological understanding of post-traumatic growth. In novels like Jane Eyre, Middlemarch, and Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Georgia explained with quiet confidence, we see female protagonists who experience profound suffering not as mere victims, but as agents of their own moral development. Their pain becomes catalytic rather than merely destructive. The questions from the committee were probing but respectful, challenging Georgia to defend her methodology and conclusions. She responded with clarity and insight, demonstrating not just mastery of her subject matter, but a deeper, more personal understanding of transformation through adversity. When the committee chair announced their unanimous approval and offered congratulations to Dr. Hammond, Georgia felt a surge of satisfaction that transcended academic achievement. This milestone represented not just scholarly accomplishment but personal victory, the reclamation of ambitions she had subordinated for too long. Evelyn and William waited outside the conference room, greeting her with enthusiastic hugs and congratulations when she emerged. Evelyn had taken the morning off from her laboratory to support her friend, while William had rearranged client meetings to be present for this important moment. Dr. Georgia Hammond, Evelyn declared with a broad smile, has a magnificent ring to it, doesn't it? It certainly does, William agreed, his usual reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm. This calls for a proper celebration. They had arranged a lunch at Georgia's favorite restaurant, where a small gathering of colleagues and friends awaited to celebrate her achievement. Among them was Amelia Hammond, who embraced Georgia with maternal pride. "I knew you would be brilliant," she whispered. "Absolutely brilliant." The celebration extended into the evening, with toasts and congratulations flowing freely. Throughout it all, Georgia found herself observing the moment with a strange, dual perspective, fully present in her joy, yet also aware of how profoundly her life had changed in just 3 months. Later that night, alone in her home, Georgia opened her laptop and navigated to the Oxford University website. The application for the Victorian Literature Fellowship waited in her drafts folder, complete except for the final submission. With her doctorate now official, nothing stood in the way of this next step. Her finger hovered over the submit button, momentarily hesitating as the magnitude of the potential change registered. Oxford meant relocating to England for at least 2 years. It meant leaving behind the comfortable familiarity of her current position, her home, the support network of friends like Evelyn and William. Yet it also meant embracing the full potential of her academic career, immersing herself in one of the world's foremost centers for Victorian literary studies. It meant choosing her own path without compromise or accommodation to anyone else's needs or preferences. Georgia pressed submit, watching as the confirmation message appeared on screen. Whatever came next, whether acceptance or rejection, the choice had been entirely her own. 2 months later, Georgia stood in her living room surrounded by carefully labeled boxes. The email from Oxford had arrived 3 weeks earlier, offering her the fellowship position with a start date in early September. She had accepted immediately, setting in motion the logistics of international relocation. The house had sold quickly, faster than Georgia had anticipated, to a young professor couple with 2 small children. They had fallen in love with the warm colors Georgia had chosen, the comfortable furnishings she was leaving behind, the garden she had tended with renewed enthusiasm in recent months. Evelyn arrived to help with the final packing, bringing coffee and pastries from their favorite cafe. "I still can't believe you're really leaving," she said, settling on the one remaining chair in the living room. "6 months ago, you were a married literature professor firmly rooted in suburban American life. Now you're a single doctor of philosophy heading to Oxford." Georgia smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. Life can change completely in an instant, can't it? One banking notification about a restaurant charge, and suddenly everything is different. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked thoughtfully. "Not the divorce," I know that was necessary, but the way we handled it? The green hair incident? Georgia considered the question seriously. No, she finally answered. I needed that moment of, I don't know, creative justice? Without it, I might have fallen into the familiar pattern of passive acceptance or forgiveness, without true accountability. And, Sebastian, do you regret losing the marriage? I regret that our marriage wasn't what I believed it to be, Georgia clarified, but I don't regret moving forward without it. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired, at least not in their original form. They worked through the morning, packing the remaining items Georgia would ship to England. Most of her furniture and household goods had been sold or donated, her life distilled to essentials and irreplaceables, books, research materials, personal mementos, and a carefully curated wardrobe that now included several bold, colorful pieces like the yellow dress that had marked the beginning of her transformation. At noon, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of William with the moving truck he had arranged. As they loaded the final boxes, Georgia took a last walk through the empty house, each room echoing with memories both painful and precious. In the master bedroom, where she had first discovered Sebastian's betrayal, Georgia paused by the window overlooking the garden. The early spring bulbs she had planted last fall were beginning to emerge, crocuses pushing through the soil with determined vigor, promising beauty to owners who would arrive after she had departed. There was something poetic in that continuity, Georgia thought. Life persisting, beauty emerging from dormancy, new growth following winter's necessary stillness, like the Victorian heroines she studied, who transformed suffering into moral strength and personal evolution. She had emerged from betrayal, not diminished, but clarified, her sense of self and purpose refined rather than destroyed. Downstairs, Evelyn called her name, reminding her of the schedule they needed to maintain. Georgia took one final look around the room, then descended to join her friends. The drive to the airport was filled with light conversation and practical details, final arrangements for Georgia's mail forwarding, the management of her financial affairs during her absence, promises of regular video calls to maintain their connection across the Atlantic. At the international terminal, the moment of farewell arrived too quickly. Evelyn embraced Georgia tightly, tears evident, despite her attempts to maintain composure. "Promise you'll call as soon as you're settled," she insisted, "and remember, you always have a home to come back to with us if Oxford doesn't work out." "I will," Georgia promised, returning the embrace with equal emotion. "But Oxford will work out. This is where my path leads now." William hugged her next, his usual reserve giving way to genuine affection. "We're proud of you," he said simply. "Not just for Oxford, but for everything these past months." As Georgia moved through security and toward her gate, she felt a strange lightness. Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of something new. Not merely freedom from a marriage that had ultimately proven false, but freedom to move toward a future shaped by her own choices and ambitions. Settled in her seat as the plane prepared for takeoff, Georgia opened her carry-on bag and removed the small journal Amelia had given her as a parting gift. Inside the front cover, the older woman had written a quote from Jane Eyre, "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." Georgia smiled, running her fingers over the words. How fitting that Bronte's heroine, a woman who had endured betrayal, who had walked away from a false relationship rather than compromise her integrity, who had found her way to genuine happiness on her own terms, should accompany her on this journey. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Georgia closed her eyes, feeling the moment of suspension between leaving and arriving, between past and future. The hurt of Sebastian's betrayal had not disappeared entirely. Such wounds never vanish without trace, but it had transformed into something else. Wisdom, resilience, self-knowledge. The green dye that had temporarily marked Sebastian and Samantha had long since faded, but the experience had left more permanent impressions on all involved. For Georgia, it had been the catalyst for reclaiming her authentic self after years of gradual compromise. For Sebastian, according to his letter, it had forced a confrontation with reality he could not charm or deflect his way around. Even for Samantha, perhaps it had offered a lesson about the true nature of seemingly uncomplicated relationships. 6 months earlier, Georgia Hammond had been a woman betrayed, her sense of self and security shattered by her husband's infidelity. Now, as Dr. Georgia Hammond headed toward a prestigious fellowship at Oxford University, she was something else entirely, not defined by betrayal or divorce or even academic achievement, but by the purposeful choices that had transformed crisis into opportunity. The plane lifted off, leaving behind the city where Georgia had lived her entire adult life. Through the window, she watched as familiar landmarks receded, growing smaller until they disappeared beneath clouds. England awaited, with its storied universities, rich literary history, and possibilities yet unknown. Georgia opened her journal to the first blank page and began to write, not about the past or what she had lost, but about the future she was claiming for herself. In that moment of suspended animation between two continents, between one life and another, she recognized a profound truth that echoed the Victorian novels she had dedicated her career to studying. True redemption comes not from erasing painful experiences, but from allowing them to catalyze growth that would otherwise remain dormant. The taste of betrayal had been bitter indeed, but from that bitterness had come clarity, purpose, and ultimately a sweetness she could never have anticipated. The incomparable flavor of a life authentically and courageously lived on her own terms. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.